Hey everyone, it's Marc Sabatella from the Mastering MuseScore School here, bringing you today's edition of the Music Master Class. So we've been working on some duets. I kind of made that challenge to think about writing for just two instruments. And along the way, a couple people have chosen to write piano as either one of the instruments or accompaniment for the duets. And that's given me an opportunity to want to talk a little bit more about that. So that's what we'll be talking about mostly today, and whatever else comes up. So hopefully that was intelligible. I'm still working on the technical stuff. I have to say, I also just yesterday got, and I'm also remembering that I need to bring up the chat on my phone so I can be watching the chat while I'm looking at other things too. Right. So I just yesterday picked up a device. It's a little Yamaha mixer specifically designed to do the kind of stuff that I'm doing here, so that I will be able to incorporate my playing, my being at the piano a little bit more. So there is audio, hopefully. Hopefully you're getting audio. Yes. Okay, there it is. Okay, cool. Um, okay, so yeah, I wanted to talk some about writing for piano, and specifically writing accompaniment for piano as opposed to writing solo piano, or piano as the main instrument with other accompaniment. And so, that's not necessarily the only thing that I'll talk about, but it is kind of going to be a little bit of a focus. And it came up a couple times. So one is that Dean Hamill has a piece that we looked at briefly either last week or the week before. Now I can't even remember because it's all a blur to me. And excuse me. um, I'm going to play through the piece. So I'm always going to have try to remember to turn off repeats so that pieces don't take longer than they otherwise would to play. But listening to the music is an important part of the process of talking about it. It doesn't make sense to talk about it if we don't actually hear the music. So I'm going to reset my volume here to standard volume, and we're going to listen to Dean's piece, and then I'm going to talk some stuff about it and talk about some other things. So let's hear some music here. Yeah, beautiful job, Dean. Just beautiful. I've we've checked out a little bit of Dean's music in the past, and you just have a marvelous touch with what you do. So I want to call attention to a few things about how the piece is constructed musically, and some of the things that we can learn from this. So the the first thing to observe is right there. It's really kind of three different sections, more or less. Right, we have this opening section, which is also the closing section, and then we have this section, right? Basically, as a section well, I guess four sections, because I'm going to say that this has a different feel. So that's section number 3, and then section number 4 is this one. Right? So we've got, and then it comes back to basically the opening section. So as far as what's kind of going on in the piece, it's good to start by thinking about the big picture, because I don't know about you, but often I get wrapped up into, I'm going to start composing, and I start with measure 1 and just start writing and don't really have that idea in my head of where I'm going with this. And sometimes that's fine, but often if you really want to create an effective piece, especially an effective piece of any length, you're going to want to take that big picture approach. I know growing up, there's this cliche that you see over and over in like movies and TV shows. And I have to think the people who write this cliche are know that it's a cliche, and that is of the author with a typewriter. It's always a typewriter. Well, at least originally that was the thing. And they put the piece of paper in, and right, they do the thing with the typewriter, and then they go chapter 1. And then they sit there and look at the blank page like, I don't even know what the heck I'm writing. Or they'll write the title of the piece and then chapter 1, and then they just stare blankly. That's not how you write. I mean, that's not how most people write things. Certainly you don't write a movie script with like no idea of where you're starting and then start with the first scene. I mean, it's possible, but that's not generally how things are put together. It's storyboarding, it's thinking of a big picture and putting stuff together. So anyhow, I like to talk about that because it's something I can't talk about. It's easy for me to get lost talking about details when I'm doing these classes. And I definitely want to always try to have that awareness that it's not always about the details. Often it's about these bigger picture things. So, just checking out the chat and making sure I'm not missing anything here. Okay, good. So one of the things that is going on in this piece, also a little big picture, but now getting down into a little more details, is this idea of the tonality changing between major and minor, right? The key signature is written A flat major, and it's mostly in that key, but it certainly spends a significant amount of time really feeling more like A flat minor, right? And so if we listen right off the bat, just that much. He has clearly established the key of A flat because, well, he's started with an A flat, ended the phrase on A flat, and he's doing two things that are really common that, will help establish a key. One is going up to 2 in 1. 2 to 1 is something that helps establish that the lower of the two notes when it's a whole step. So yeah, this is actually pretty deep that I'm going to be talking about here. If you take a note and take a note a whole step above it, between those two notes, the bottom note will assert itself as the tonic in the absence of any other information. Because if the top note was the tonic, then I would expect an A natural. Let me change that to A natural, and now listen to this measure again. At that point, that half step leading up leads you to believe B flat is the tonic and A is a leading tone. But by making it a whole step up, that 1 to 2 and then coming back to 1, it's really kind of establishing 1 as our tonic and having that 5 to 1, right? This 1, 5, 1. That is also establishing it. And then another 2 to 1. But what he hasn't done is given us a leading tone. And I think that's deliberate because right now he hasn't given us scale degree 3, nor has he given us scale degree 7, because those are the things that are going to do the most to establish the major tonality. Yes, leading tones are used in minor keys, but they're only used in minor keys because they're borrowed from the major key. So he is being as clear about what the tonal center is here as you possibly could be without establishing whether it's major or minor. And until that first chord comes in, you have no concept of whether that's a major chord, a major key, or a minor key. So the use of this F flat is an interesting choice there, right? That's scale degree flat 6, and this is hearkening to that, borrowed chord idea that I talk about a lot, the minor 4 chord. That's not literally what's happening here. It's not that chord exactly. The 4 chord would be D flat. A D flat minor chord would have a D flat somewhere in it, obviously, and we never actually get that sound, but we certainly get that note, F flat, and we get the C flat that are both coming from the key of A flat minor. So we get this interesting colorful chord. So that interesting colorful chord, that's establishing A flat minor, right? He's already established A flat as our key. We've got the root 5th and root here. We've got the 3rd, the root. So, we've got an entire A flat minor chord, but he's giving us this extra little bit of color, that flatted 6th scale degree that provides some particular color to this sound. So it's not just minor, it's a dark minor. By using that, because actually, in minor keys, sometimes we might use scale degree 6 as opposed to flat 6. That's how I like to name my scale degrees based on major keys for those who haven't followed my theory courses. So scale degree 6, right, comes from melodic minor, also comes from Dorian. That would be a fine chord too, but it won't be as dark. Let's hear from here. So that's a chord too. That's a Dorian type of chord or a melodic minor type of chord. It's got its own darkness to it, but man, it is not as dark as what he actually wrote. That darkness is, it's a big aspect of what makes that opening sound work the way it does. There's another thing I would want to point out. So I said I'm going to talk about piano accompaniment, but obviously I'm talking about everything in the world except piano accompaniment right now, but that's okay. There's a thing going on that's worth calling attention to. The E flat in the left hand of the piano, and then the F flat in the right hand of the piano. That interval is a minor 9th. And that interval from this E flat, this is E flat 3, right? I always forget my octave names for some reason. I should know them better. Middle C is C4, right? Oh, that's curious. I need to click on the piano staff. Now I hear middle C as a piano middle C. Okay, so C4 is middle C, so this E flat is E flat 3. This F flat here is F flat 4. That's the 4th octave. Is how these octaves are normally numbered. And that interval, that minor 9th, is considered the single most dissonant interval there is. It's more interval than a minor 2nd, which it is like a minor 2nd plus an octave. But that minor 2nd plus an octave is considered more dissonant than the minor 2nd by itself. And it's considered more dissonant than a major 7th or a minor 7th or even a tritone. And that's sort of, it's all subjective, how dissonant is dissonant, but it's something that a lot of arrangers really respect, even like jazz arrangers who are embracing a lot of dissonance will avoid minor 9ths, except when you want the specific crunch that it gives to your chord. And that is in abundance here. That dissonance between the E flat and the F flat there. So he's doing a lot of things with that opening chord to really set a mood, plus just that alternating of solo voice and piano. So that using the two different instruments there, or voice and instrument, alternating, that's an interesting textural choice, right? Because one of the things I want to talk about is the texture of what's going on in here. So that's and then he goes on with something where the melody again is non-committal, whether it's major or minor, but then the accompaniment says, hey, major. Ah, major after all, right? So even the 5 chord here is non-committal, right? Because he doesn't even have a third on that 5 chord. The 5 chord here, the E flat 7, there is no G, which would have been the third. What is going on? Why am I hearing an A flat still? Just an optical illusion. So even by avoiding the leading tone here, the G, he's still suspending a little bit of our sense of major or minor, because again, that leading tone is used in minor keys, but it comes from the major key. So he's really avoided that, I think, probably kind of on purpose, whether or not he was consciously thinking, must avoid leading tone, or just where his ears went. I think that's part of why it went there. And then finally, we get a major chord to set it up. And then now we're going to get into this next section, which sets up kind of a pattern. So when we talk about writing accompaniment, piano accompaniment, or really any kind of accompaniment, especially for vocal melodies, the question that always comes up, and this is one thing I alluded to, mentioned when I talked about this piece last week. Was it last week? I just don't know. Is, do you let the accompaniment double the melody? And there is no right answer. I mean, it is a common technique, absolutely. Sometimes we have the accompaniment double the melody, and sometimes we don't. So he's doing it at the beginning, right? That's there. But then he goes to a place where not so much. The F is not in the accompaniment. The G flat is, but it's changed octaves. And the A flat, again, is down in this lower octave. And then the D flat here, it was supposed to be a descent from A flat to D flat, and he's ascending from the A flat to the D flat, right? So he's kind of suggesting the melody, and certainly rhythmically he is, but he's not being like really dogmatic about it. And then the repeated D flat there doesn't get echoed. And then it starts to deviate more. So throughout that whole rest of the section there, the piano accompaniment isn't dealing with the melody at all, really. I mean, it goes with it, but it's not echoing it. It's not doubling it. And yes, the lyric thing is something I totally want to talk about on this piece, because he does a great job of, I don't know, word painting. Word painting is a word that is often used to mean something more, I don't know what the word is for it, more affected, more like, oh, it's the word bird shows up, and so you do a trill with some high notes where you're literally trying to sound like birds. So he's not doing that, but boy, this is restful, right? It's lets me rest in blooming meadows, and this is a very restful passage here. And then later on, when it's talking about walking through the valley of death, I mean, can you not hear the valley of death here? Right? That's death. That's Valley of Death stuff there. So yeah, he's totally word painting through this. So that question comes up of, do you double the melody? And the answer is you do if you feel like it. You don't if you don't feel like it, and that's fine. What you generally do want to do in your accompaniment is create some sense of flow. So one of the things that I often teach, especially talking to jazz pianists trying to figure out how to play solo piano when you're improvising, but it totally applies just as well to composing, is there's always kind of four elements that we're juggling in music. And again, I present this in a jazz context, but it's not just jazz. We got the melody, we have some sense of what the harmony is, and then we have the bass part, which has its own role, kind of not independent of the harmony, but it's not just, if you're playing piano, it's not just enough to do all the tinkly stuff up there. We're going to miss those bass notes. So you do it when you want the texture of not having the bass. Anyhow, we got melody, we have harmony, we have bass, and we have pulse. Something has got to be establishing a rhythm, and not just, I mean, anything is a rhythm, right? Bump, ba-da-da, bop, 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 bop. But that was a rhythm, but it's not a pulse, right? Pulse is something where you feel a repeating pattern happening. That's what establishes a pulse. And so we talk about in composing the idea of a motor rhythm, usually a rhythmic cell that kind of repeats. And he's got that going here. 4/16 followed by 4/8 is kind of his cell. Boop, 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 bum, 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 bop, 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 bum. Here he cheats his pattern, makes it a triplet instead. Not cheats, but deliberately varies. Bum, 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 boop, bum, 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 bum. And, here it changes to a quarter note at the end. It's not like you have to follow that pattern exactly, although that's a thing also, but you're allowed to vary your pattern some. So, programmatic is a different word, maybe. Programmatic is, yeah, it's music that tells a story, but yeah, so that's definitely a relevant term here also. So yeah, the idea that he's keeping that pattern going, and then the pattern also isn't just the rhythm, bum 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 bum. It's also where it goes from the piano. It goes from low to high, right? It always starts with the low note, and so it's so it's a pattern that repeats rhythmically, but it also repeats kind of sonically or pitch wise, not the exact pitches, but the general shape of the thing. And yeah, it's not always just up. There's places where the melody comes down here. Oh, and I say the melody, that's not the melody, right? The melody is what the voice is singing, and it's a repeated note. But the other lesson to keep in mind about accompaniment is you want your accompaniment to be melodic. Whether or not it's the melody, it should be its own interesting melody. So here's where the techniques of counterpoint come in. Even if you don't think of counterpoint, in the sense of we're not writing imitative counterpoint, we're not creating a fugue or anything like that, but we're creating a sense in which one voice is going D flat, and the other voice is going A, B flat, C, D flat. So we've got two different kind of melodic things, and they're both interesting in themselves, right? If I go to the mixer here and actually mute the voice for a moment here, and whoa, I don't know why sometimes I lose the ability. I just did a thing. I docked my mixer. Yeah, I'll just leave it that way. But I don't need it that wide. Can't I narrow it? All right. Stop fighting the program. Okay, so let's play. That's almost as interesting as the actual melody, right? I mean, it's just as pretty, and it's clearly part of the same piece. It's kind of part of the same whole. So the melody and the accompaniment are working together in that sense. I am going to shrink my palette back down. So I have this thing that I do, you should know, where I like to keep my palette a certain size so that I can see exactly 3 columns of lines on the palette, because this is a palette I use a lot, and I should just delete all this stuff that I never use. I never use half those lines, and I've done that before, but then I've reset my palettes. So In any case, that's just a little thing of mine. So that idea that he's got this pattern going, and it's a rhythmic pattern, it's a sonic pattern in terms of where the pitch is. I don't know that sonic is the word I want here either, but and it's also in counterpoint. It's sometimes doubling the melody, but sometimes in counterpoint with the melody as far as what's going on. That's how you do it. That's totally what you do. So that section happens, and then we get into the Valley of Death. So during that section, obviously it's a repeating pattern, and then there's the James Bond theme, right? I don't know if it's a James Bond theme-ish type of pattern. That is what we call that particular line cliche of walking from the fifth kind of up. Actually, the James Bond cliche is a little different. It involves the sixth and other things, a little different, but similar. That's how that theme goes. I'm not singing the right pitches. So anyhow, he's got that A flat repeated through in here. So it is kind of buried in the piano part, but what we're really aware of is the we're aware of that little theme. And that is, again, kind of in counterpoint to what's happening, because the melody is just the repeated pitch. So now he does a surprising thing to me. Heart shall not know fear. I can sing that at pitch, right? Heart shall not know fear. That's the point where I was expecting it to go major. And I'm like, well, what is he thinking here? He's still dealing with minor, but then it repeats. Right? So what's happening is it's like he says, my heart shall not know fear, but doesn't entirely believe it yet, or is saying it to himself. He's saying it, but it hasn't clicked yet. Then he states it with more confidence, like, yeah, it has come over me now, this feeling that I don't know fear. I am now embracing that by returning to the major key there. So I feel like that's some word painting going on there as well. So as far as why have the repeated note in the melody, I don't know. With dramatic intensity, it says here, it's kind of dramatic. You could liken it to recitative in opera, which is typically also kind of one pitch, but it doesn't have the same vibe as recitative at all. And recitative doesn't necessarily stay as like totally centered on one pitch like that. Certainly wouldn't be as measured in rhythm. The idea with recitative is that you actually embrace the rhythm of the lyrics more, because no one says, though I walk through the valley of deaths. No one would talk that way. And though I walk through the valley of death's dark shadow. I couldn't remember how the thing went. So the pacing of the melody here is not the natural pacing of the lyrics as it would be often in recitative, but it has a little bit of that vibe to it anyhow. But yeah, there's definitely something ominous about the repeating of one note. It's there's a certain ominous to it. Again, if I relate this to movies and I think about the Jaws theme, which is just two notes, right? And there's something ominous about. There's a certain type of repetition there. Artie Shaw's Nightmare. I have to check that out because I'm not familiar with that reference. Nightmare Fits, Artie Shaw Nightmare. I got to check it out. Okay, so then he goes to major and is getting ready to set up now the next section. So at this part here, now he has a new texture happening. Right now, it's just this running stream of 16th notes that's pretty well uninterrupted throughout this section. It's let me shrink down the screen a little bit more. However long it is, it's not that long. It's 8 measures. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 measures long. Yeah. 8 measures in which the 16ths continue uninterrupted. But they do move between the right hand and then moves down to the left hand. So there's, some play with how he's using that texture. All right, Dean, good to see some comments from you in here. I'm glad you're here, able to participate. Yeah, the way that line, because that line is pretty repetitive, right? This is kind of an Alberti bass type of figure that just arpeggiating of the triad. But then here, it's actually doing something more interesting melodically. Right, and it's doing that for a couple of reasons. One, because the melody is staying constant, so the all interest has shifted to the piano accompaniment. That's something to consider as you're doing these sorts of things also, that you want one main point of interest, where if one note is holding something, if one instrument is holding something, the other one moves, and vice versa. And a sort of trade-off of who's holding and who's moving is part of how you write for two instruments or two voices or whatever. And it definitely holds in piano accompaniment as well. When the voice is resting, that's when we expect the little fills and things to happen in the piano part. And he's got the piano part moving. The moving chords in the right hand as well. And he is doubling the melody through this section as the top note of those arpeggios also, right? But he's not, again, doing it 100% consistently, doesn't have it really here. That D flat is buried in the arpeggio. That C is buried in this arpeggio. So it's a very free approach to this. So I'm going to double the melody when I feel like it, and when it doesn't suit me, I won't. And to me, that works. I don't think there's any reason to feel like you have to be consistent about this. And I think that's a lesson that's taken me a while to learn. That sometimes it's good to be consistent, and there's some things that just don't actually matter, and the variety is more important than the consistency. And that question of doubling of the melody, I've come to realize is one of them. There's nothing wrong with doubling for just a few notes here and there and then leaving it, or doubling it mostly but leaving it for a few notes. Nothing wrong with doing that. You might want to be at least somewhat conscious of that, when you're doubling and when you're not, and then you make your choices. So in any case, yes, absolutely beautiful piece. And by the way, also check out what happens differently in the left hand. We go from some measures with just the whole notes, and then rocking octaves. Doom ding, doom ding, doom ding, ding ding. As far as cliches go, I can relate it to disco bass in rocking octaves like that. Not that it's unique to disco or that this at all sounds disco. I just like to make analogies. So he's got that kind of rocking octave thing going on, and then comes out of it by releasing that motion and setting up a return to the original texture by going from the 16th notes to just quarter notes to half notes to a whole note. So this gradual slowing down of the motion, and then kind of taking us back out with something very much like the beginning. So yeah, that's just a lot of really wonderful things going on in there. One thing I'm curious about, Dean, is about the choice of the instrument. I love the sound of the trombone playback on this piece. It's surprising because the range that you've set it in, it's high, right? I mean, this is the where you've placed the melody, it's a little low for a soprano voice, but certainly an alto voice. What's the highest note of it, actually? The C, the D flat there. So this kind of fits an alto voice or a low soprano, a mezzo soprano, or something like that. For a male voice to sing it in this octave, that D flat, I mean, that's like, that's operatic, screaming, that's like that's high for a tenor to sing those D flat. But so the trombone has that character of a high tenor singing, straining to hit that high D flat. And I think that the default MuseScore trombone hits it really well, but I don't think there's many male voices who would sound very merciful singing that. So it's probably a woman singing this, unless you actually know of a uh, unless you know of a male who actually has it. Now, in falsetto, you could totally, any number of people can pull that off. But it is sort of an interestingly placed melody in that, I guess for a mezzo soprano or an alto, that D flat has a certain strain to it. And that's something worth considering where you place things in the range, where the power of that is. I mean, you think about like an operatic tenor, it's somewhere around this B flat where those are the high notes, that B flat, the B, maybe a C. Those are the power notes. Those are when the operatic tenor is singing at the top of their normal range. The climactic note of Nessun Dorma and all these things, that's all in that range there. Is that note a B? It's a note of B, not a B flat. But that's where that kind of power is. And so this is pushing that for a tenor to be able to sing there. And yet when we hear the trombone there, that's exactly the right sound, right? So you would love it to, whoever sings this, you don't want mercy. You don't want that climactic note to be just sort of weak, like a note in the middle of someone's range. You want it to have that oomph behind it. So by writing it in a range where, and then giving it to a singer who's has the power in the notes that you want to have the power, is one way. So if you're envisioning this an octave lower, for a baritone soloist, so this B flat is the no the oh yeah. So I was actually singing it in your thing. I was singing, though I walk. I'm singing an octave lower than that. I'm not saying though I walk. So though I walk through the, yeah, that could totally be a baritone an octave lower, absolutely. And then that D flat, wherever it was, would be the kind of strain note. Because for me, that D flat's not a problem because I'm not a good enough singer to have a good range. I'm mediocre all over my range. But that's the D flat right above the staff. D flat. Okay, I do strain for it, right? That's because I'm also a bass more than a baritone. But yeah, that would be a power note. The D flat an octave lower than that would be a power note for a baritone. So yeah, beautiful. Okay, so what I want to do is, I know we looked at one of Jim's pieces last time, but since he also had a piano piece happening, I definitely want to show it. Except Jim, oh, I forgot to tell you, you didn't make your piece. Uh, you did not make your piece downloadable, so I can't download this into MuseScore. So I'm going to play it just as is here. And meanwhile, Jim, if you feel like it, go ahead and enable download so I can download it and load it into MuseScore. But I'll play it just from the website here. Great job, Jim. Yeah, so you definitely have a feel for that kind of music. Hopefully, you've managed to enable the download in the intervening time here. Let me see. We'll find out real quick. Not yet. Okay. Well, I'll keep stalling. So let me know in the chat when it's enabled. If you're not sure how, there should be a three-dot menu here where you can go there and say update this score, and when you do that, it will give you the option to enable the download. Okay, so obviously totally different style, right? So this style here, now we're talking a very consistent. It doesn't have those different sections, nor should it, because in this overall style of piece, you don't expect there to be major differences in sections within a piece. Once we've established this sort of stride piano, so I use the term stride piano, and some of you might not be familiar with that. You might be familiar with the term ragtime. So ragtime is a music form that, as such, derives from the 19th century, the late 19th century composers like Scott Joplin and others who composed music note for note, and it was just written out, but with that same type of accompaniment pattern, this kind of umpa pattern like that, like you see in this measure here, boom chick, that kind of pattern, but with these sorts of syncopations in the right hand, ragged time. That's why it's called ragtime. So the overall sense of this stylistically is coming from ragtime music, but then there was a whole school of pianists, jazz pianists, improvising pianists in the early 20th century who took that ragtime music and said, I want to improvise with this and take this kind of the next level. So that's what the term stride piano refers to. It's basically coming from a ragtime tradition, but then bringing in more overtly jazz elements in terms of literally I lost my chat over here somehow. Can I get it back? Huh. Don't know where it is. Full screen? No? All right, not sure where it is. I'll have to switch over here and just monitor the chat periodically this way. Okay, so anyhow, stride piano is sort of a general term for this type of piano playing with the back and forth motion in the left hand and syncopated things in the right hand. Now, as that goes, this is relatively simple. The right hand has a pretty easy job compared to how a lot of stride piano would go, because stride piano was, well, ragtime is a solo piano music, and stride piano is essentially a solo form also. Now, you can accompany in a stride style, but you have to tone it way back, and that's exactly what Jim has done here. Had he continued with all of that activity throughout, it really would have gotten in the way of the melody. There are pianists, like actual like stride pianists, who would do that, and for that reason, there's people like Art Tatum, who's just like an absolute monster of piano virtuosity, who is sort of has, a sort of a love-hate. Well, people have a love-hate relationship with him. It's hard to listen to him and say and deny that he's like one of the best pianists you've ever heard. But sometimes you listen to him and say, well, gee, I wish he would kind of get out of the way a little bit because there's other stuff going on. So some people would say he's too busy, or was too busy, died a long time ago. And not just Art Tatum, but really a lot of stride pianists could be seen as on the busy side for their accompaniment if they didn't learn how to scale it back. And so that's a thing. And so you scale it back while you're accompanying other people's melody, and then you hope to have a solo section where you get to shine a little bit more and do more complex things. It's bugging me that I can't see the chat anymore. Got it back. Yes. All right. Now you've got it downloadable. Excellent. So, still denied. Oh, maybe I have to refresh the page. Did I refresh the page? Refresh page. Download. Yeah. Oh well. Go ahead and see if you can try again. See if I don't know what to say though. It should be just enable score download as a checkbox. It doesn't matter about it's not about the privacy. It's about the enable score download button checkbox in there somewhere. So okay, so the one thing that is like, so the right hand has been scaled back and made easier here. The left hand is not as big chord. Like the bigger the jumps, the harder it can be to play in the left hand, because accuracy wise, every time you move your hand like from one area of the piano to the next area of the piano, there's a danger of coming down on the wrong notes. As long as the piano isn't moving that much, it's easier. So the bigger the jumps are, the harder it gets. That's actually sometimes a bigger issue than how big the chords are. Big chords aren't necessarily a problem as much as big leaps are. And so those are the things that you balance. Like some of the things here I looked at and said, oh, that's not even going to be playable. Like this one here, I thought, hey, this isn't playable. My left hand's not that big. But then I realized, oh, but the right hand is doing nothing there. So I guess really what's going to happen is the right hand is really taking on these notes. I think the left hand is just playing the E flat. The right hand is playing maybe the rest of that chord, perhaps, or something like that. Similarly, this leap from this low E flat to that high B flat there, that's a big leap for the left hand. And yet, if I take that B flat in the right hand, that becomes trivially easy. So I haven't worked through the whole piece that way, but I mentioned in the comments on the community site. Oh yeah, brought to you by the community, by Mastering MuseScore community. If you're checking this out on YouTube and you're not already part of the community, check out the pinned link at the top of the chat so you can join the community and take part in the any further discussions. And lots more. Got tons of stuff going on there. So, by the way, you still also have some G flats here in the piano part. I talked about that in the community thing, where the D7 should be spelt as F sharps, and that includes these G flats in the piano. That kind of messes me up as a pianist. It's a visual thing where you expect a triad to look a certain way. You expect line, 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 space, 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 and if you don't see that, your brain doesn't think triad, and your hand doesn't go to the right position. Like maybe I start to put my second finger on that G flat instead of my third finger, which maybe actually ends up being appropriate in this case. But those are the sorts of mistakes you make. You start to get the wrong finger ready, and then by the time you find the notes, you realize, oh, not the right notes. So I mentioned that before in other contexts, but there it is in this one. So in any case, he's got a lot of nice simplicity happening while keeping that stride feel. Now that measure right there, I feel is a missed opportunity. I'm gonna try to download again. Aha, looks like success. Thank you. All right, so I'm gonna show you what I mean about that measure. There's a thing that you do that is totally effective, and I say do more, and that's a place where I want it. So, oh, it'll be fun to watch that part on the piano, won't it? If I look at just the piano part, I guess it's still playing. Yeah, it's just showing those notes. I never remember if the piano shows the other parts or not. Okay, so except now I don't remember where I am. It's right there on that C7 chord, the second measure. So you probably at this point know what I'm going to say, or maybe you don't, but let's think back to when I was talking about when one note is being sustained in one instrument, that maybe you think about not sustaining the other one. Well, obviously you're not sustaining here, but here is a place where by the second measure of that C7, I'm ready for something else. I'm ready for something other than the boom, boom, chick thing. So here's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for what you do here. Right? I'm looking for that walk up line. So I'm going to try and I'll make it walking tenths. Walking tenths are kind of a thing if you got the hands for them. So here's the thing about piano. Whoever designed the piano was a little short-sighted, I think. They designed it in such a way that you can spell that as a D sharp just for the hell of it. They designed it so that anyone more or less can play an octave because they wanted it to be playable. And, people probably 500 years ago had smaller hands anyhow, when they started designing keyboard instruments. So most people can play an octave, but very few people can play a tenth well. When I say very few, well, okay, maybe it's 20%, but that's still, it's not me. That's all I know. And certainly very few women can play tenths. And, men tend to have larger hands. I have I have a pretty wide stretch, so I can actually hit some tenths, even though my hand's not big. I can hit some tenths, but not all tenths. So anyhow, I'm going to play what I just wrote here, because that idea of these things we call walking tenths is a pretty powerful technique. Except that shouldn't have been in E flat, but in E natural. So that type of figure, those walking tenth figures, you've got some going on, I'll take more. Even though I can't play the tenth that well, I can roll them, which is actually effective. Ba-dum, 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 or I can actually turn them into eighth notes. Or there's all sorts of ways to make a lemonade out of the lemon of not being able to reach the tenth. But the other thing is, depending on how you write it, I might be able to take the top note in my right hand, right? So I often write or play passages like that involve these walking tenths using my right thumb to be that top note there. So let's see. Yeah, so that's the sort of thing that I will always appreciate more of those. But the thing is, you don't want to do it too much either. And these are the places where you have this exposed. And I can tell you actually very specifically, it's when the melody has stopped. You have a single chord that lasts for two measures. The melody stops on the first measure, and you're using the circle of fifths, because that line, bom, 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 C, D, D sharp, E leading to F. This should have an F on it also, right? That walking tenths that walks up, exactly that pattern. From C, then up a whole step, then up a half step, up a half step, and then up a half step to get there, right? It's getting you from C to F with that exact pattern. 5, 6, sharp 6, 7, 1. It's a cliche of the genre. So and it works anytime it's circle of fifths, dominant seventh, to it doesn't even matter where it's going to, whether it's major or minor, as long as it's a circle of fifths thing. And you can also walk down. There's other walking patterns too, but that's the one that specifically happens so often, where you have this dominant seventh for two measures. The melody stops on the first measure of it. The second measure is the spot where I expect that line. So that's the kind of place. And so you do it here, right? That's exactly the same situation. The melody has stopped moving, or at least moved less. It's just half notes, and you're doing the exact same thing there. So that you're doing the thing. I'm just saying, I'll take more. This one here, you've got two measures of the D7. So here, the chord is only moving a half step from D7 to E flat. So suddenly that cliche, that particular walking tenths cliche, isn't going to work for us in that particular pattern. 5, 6 sharp, that whatever, root, second, sharp 2. I guess I should talk about this line. I was talking about in scale degrees as if we were in F minor. That might have been confusing. Let me talk about it roots for the C chord. That's the root. That's 1, 2, sharp 2, 3. So that pattern isn't going to do us as many favors in this measure. We're trying to get from D7 to E flat. We don't have as many cliches for doing that. We have cliches for going around the circle of fifths. We have some cliches for moving a third, not as many cliches for moving a step like that. So for moving a third, ba da 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 dum moves you down a third, or ba da 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 dum moves you up a third. In 4/4 time, those lines will move you a third. We don't have great cliches for this sort of thing. Bum ba da dum would do it, but it's not as satisfying. So sometimes you have to find other things, and this might be a place where a right hand fill is maybe a little more what might fill the things. You're doing some nice fills in some other spots. I love that little. That's just so totally. And this that little chord thing, I will say that when you're moving between the notes of the same chord, like I said, that's a pretty big leap, and you don't have much time to do it. But there's something about that grabbing a fistful of notes that's a single chord and then reaching down for that same chord here, that to me is sometimes easier than the left hand jump. Maybe it's just because we're so used to focusing on our right hand anyhow. But anyhow, for me, that isn't necessarily as hard as some of the jumps that we were talking about, that I was talking about in the left hand. Um, so anyhow, those sorts of syncopations he's got going here are fantastic. Those little walking lines he's got are fantastic. And I think that the character of this violin melody here, I mean, it sounds exactly like the type of melody that a violinist would actually improvise. I mean, in principle, anyone might improvise the same kinds of melodies, but in reality, there are things about certain instruments that cause people to improvise differently from one instrument to another. And violin has its own unique things, the bowing. And there's a thing that violinists do, right? You learn to down bow on the downbeat. One and two and one and two. And what it means is you're going to give a slight emphasis to the notes on the beat, which is totally appropriate in classical music, not so appropriate in jazz. But most violinists never train themselves to get away from that. I think it would be really interesting to see a violinist go one and two and one and one and two and one and how am I doing it? One and two. So they're doing the beats with the up bow and doing the ands on the down bow to give the slight emphasis to the off beats. It would be an interesting thing for a violinist to do. And I always try to get people to try to demo it for me, and they're all like, "No, this feels too weird. I can't do it." But in any case, it causes violinists to have a somewhat different sense of their phrasing from how other instruments might do things. And to me, in ways that I can't describe, a lot about this feels violin-y. It also just feels like the style, right? I mean, I say it feels violin-y, but it also feels like how a clarinet player might have improvised, playing with Louis Armstrong when this piece was recorded. It's just got that overall kind of feel. So, is ragtime almost classical music? Oh, yeah. I mean, it's a form of classical music. I mean, it is hard to define what exactly should define what classical music is, but it is composed, and it certainly uses a lot of classical devices harmonically and so forth. Jazz wasn't a thing yet, so there was it's its own thing, ragtime, but it's as much a part of the classical tradition, probably more so than it is part of the jazz tradition, because the jazz tradition didn't exist when ragtime was coming about. So here, though, the structure of this is so much looser, right? A ragtime piece would be very structured. It's structured like a march, actually, as far as having these different sections. And they all have the same basic rhythmic and syncopation there, but they have different harmonic things going on, different melodic things going on. So the overall big picture form of a ragtime piece is very similar to a march, usually. Different strains, some of them repeat. Maybe we come back to the first one, maybe we don't. And what's happening with this in the accompaniment is it's not that. It's much freer than that, as it should be, as far as not having the same sort of structure. It's using a lot of the same devices, and we see the same chords over and over again, because that's the structure of a jazz piece. It's a whatever it is, a 16 bar song, or I wasn't really paying attention to what the form actually is, but it's the same melody, and then that melody again for another verse, and then with the improvisation, and then the final verse out. So the it's basically the same form over and over again as far as that goes. That's kind of a jazz thing, or a pop thing, if you will. But then the way the accompaniment is, it's just sort of monitoring the melody and responding to it, and trying to deal with it, and be simple where it needs to be simple, be complex where it needs to be complex. And it doesn't have the same rigid structure of how the actual accompaniment, like if I took the melody out, this accompaniment wouldn't make as much sense, because it is so derived from the melody. So yeah, that's, I guess, what I wanted to say about that. Oh, here you are using a nice little line on the D7. Ah, so you use that exact line here. I didn't even notice that because I was so focused on the time you didn't. This, by the way, is that breaking the tenths up thing that I talked about that I do because I can't play the 10th one. I'll do it like that. So you've got that exact line here. And then it goes to E flat. So you do it in the place where I said maybe that line isn't going to work so well, but you know, it works. It works just fine. It's just, it's a little more, it makes the resolution to the E flat a little more unexpected. So I feel like there was a point that I was going to make that, uh, um, that I haven't quite made, and I have lost in my brain what it was. So if it comes back to me, I will. But it just by using these devices and throwing them in where they need to be thrown in to fit the melody, it just makes this piece totally work, and I like it a lot. So yeah, beautiful job. So the last thing that I just wanted to talk about, and I'm just going to talk about it briefly because I know that there's a couple people working on this, is if for people who aren't aware of it, Bach's Prelude number one. So Jim, excellent piece, love it. Dean, your piece, fantastic. It's just really a pleasure looking at this music. So this is Bach's Prelude number one in C major from the Well-Tempered Clavier, Volume 1. Most of you have heard this before. Many of you have probably played it before. So I'm not going to play the whole piece, but the thing is, this was written to be a solo piano piece, but it's a prelude. Now, prelude right now, it's a prelude to a fugue, not a prelude to a kiss, but a prelude to a fugue, right? Because it's prelude and fugue in every key. And so the preludes, generally speaking, in Bach's way of thinking of them, are more etudes. They're little exercises. They're less like standalone pieces than Chopin preludes are. Chopin preludes are not preludes to anything. They are standalone. That's it. Bach's preludes, at least the ones in this, are more like the it's the prelude, it's the teaser for the fugue to come. But you know, not just that, but they definitely have a quality to them of feeling like he's working out some idea. And this is the one that's most obviously so. I mean, it never leaves that pattern until the very, very end of the prelude. Here. That's the first time he leaves that. So when I talk about this repeating motor rhythm that moves through different harmonies, Bach never leaves it. And that's a little unusual because it's totally unbroken. It's just exactly that pattern. You drop the needle anywhere, right? More of the same. So it's just literally, it feels like an accompaniment pattern, right? I mean, compare that to Dean's piece. You know, this accompaniment pattern that was happening here. And I mentioned it being this dum bum 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 bum, and this going rising figure between the hands. This is essentially the same pattern, the same kind of pattern, except this time it's just uninterrupted sixteenths. But it's not just going up, it's going up and then repeating the last few notes. So it's a very specific pattern that repeats over and over again. There's no melody. It's an accompaniment pattern that it just goes on for 20 something measures, and yet every line is a melody. It's not a melody, there is no melody, but it's all melody. The melody formed by the top note. You know, I don't want to sing in that octave. D, T, C. I'm singing the top notes, but I could just as easily have picked out this note. G. I gotta find the note. G. A, G, A, F sharp, G, right? So every single one of these parts, I can pick this note. C, and that one jumps around a little bit more. Yeah, I'm saying the right note. But it's still, there's other places where this no, C, D. I'm just following the same note within each chord, and they're all nice melodies. None of them are like, melodies that are so strong on their own that he wanted to put words to it, so he didn't. But then this guy Gounod came along. I don't know how you pronounce his name. I can't speak French at all, but he put a melody to it, Ave Maria there. Right? And what he did in doing this is not Bach's exact melody. It's similar, right? This E is the top note of the arpeggio. The F is the top note of the arpeggio, but the arpeggio stays on F, and Gounod takes it up to the G. The pronunciation, and then it's back to E, so it's in sync again. The A is in sync with what Bach does, but then he's got this nice little moving line. Nice that E is Bach's top note. The G is Bach's top note. And then again, this little walk up back to C, which is the top note. And now the C is again the top note, but F sharp. He's coming to the F sharp, which is like the middle note of this line, and he's creating this walking down, ba-doo-da, doo-dum, which is just this whole new melody. So he's using some of Bach's voice leading to create his melody and finding other opportunities to create new melodies in there. So this Bach piece, because it is so well crafted, nothing is jumping out as being too jarring to make accompaniment, and yet because every line works so well on its own, it stands alone as solo music too. So anyhow, that is my observation about this piece. Is the ending a cadenza? Well, it's cadenza-like. There's certainly a cadenza. Yeah, cadenza is something like this, where basically it becomes one instrument playing on its own. The accompaniment stops and the instrument does its own thing. Typically, it might actually go out of tempo, go out of time, might involve improvisation. Bach was a killer improviser by all accounts, so for all we know, he would have improvised his own little cadenza here. All right, so that's what I came to talk to you about today. So I hope you all enjoyed the session. Feel free to continue in the comments over on the community site. I'll love to hear some more duets next time, and maybe some more duets that don't involve piano. So one of the things about piano is, and really about accompaniment. I'm using the term accompaniment, and that's really implying that the two instruments aren't equal, that one of them is the melody and the other one is just accompanying it. A duet doesn't have to be that way, right? It can be two more equals. Like Heiss's trombone duet last time, I thought was much more a piece between two equals, and some of the other pieces that I've seen posted that I want to look at next week and that I hopefully see people post in the coming week, two instruments where it's more of an equal partnership between the instruments, because then there's maybe its own set of issues to come at there. So that's what I expect I'll be looking at next time, and hope you all enjoy everything here in the community, my courses, the music that we're doing here, and I'm glad to be able to be doing this. One thing I want to tell you, I mentioned in the cafe yesterday that I'll be in Florida next week visiting my family, my parents there, and might be more than a week. I might be hanging out for a while. I'll have access to, my computer here. I won't have access to my keyboard or some of the other equipment, some of the other resources that I might sometimes use, but I don't think that'll get in our way. I think I'll still be able to do whatever I need to do exactly as we're doing it. So again, thanks to everyone for being here. Let's hear some theme music and let everyone be on their way. This has been the Music Masterclass with Marc Sabatella of the Mastering MuseScore School. We do this every Thursday at this time, 12:30 Eastern Time, 16:30 UTC. Question for some of you: am I better off saying GMT like I have been, or UTC? I'm aware of the technical distinction, but anyhow, that's when we do this. Come join us in the community site, pinned up at the top, and that's where you can continue the discussion, post your own music so I can talk about your music, and give feedback, and we can all learn together. Check out all the courses that I provide that talk about harmony and counterpoint and learn more that way.